Bruh, look at this dude. Wait till you see the. No, 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 no.
So, as I'm sure you've all seen recently, YouTube had a shooter shoot up its HQ building just outside of San Francisco, and the shooter was an Iranian, vegan, Muslim, PETA-supporting anti-government activist. In other words, the media can't politicize this. They can't make heads or tails of how to spin this narrative. And I think it's fucking glorious that this shooting has effectively become impossible to politicize. So now we can just look at what caused it. And apparently, she was motivated to do the shooting because YouTube was demonetizing her videos, and she thought that since they'd only recently begun banning gun-related content, she thought that it was a good idea to bring the content directly to them. Yeah, so, as you may be able to tell, I think YouTube really doesn't deserve any sympathy over this one. I mean, did they deserve a shooting? Not really, but they've been pissing people off for a long time with their censorship and double standards, so as far as I'm concerned, they can eat shit. But also, I love how they can't spin it into a gun control narrative because the shooting happened in a gun-free zone. I mean, they can try, and they probably will anyway, but no rational people can take that argument seriously. Speaking of gun grabbers, there's this video which really, you're gonna have to see it to believe it. I mean, words really can't do this one a justice.
When you can't make sense of the world today,
ask Mr. Jordan to show you the way.
On the Birds and the BS.
Morning, everyone, and welcome to the Birds and the BS, where we encourage you to actually take the advice you give your children.
On a side note, who's the intended target audience of this show? Because it's called The Birds and the BS. It's talking about political issues, they cuss a lot, and their slogan is they're encouraging you to take the advice you give to your children, but the tone, creative direction, and presentation look like it's going for a Nick Jr. kind of vibe. This show, in its conception, is incredibly confused.
Today's letter comes from Allie in Alabama. Dear Mr. Jordan, my son is always playing with his gum and spitting it on the floor, so I've made a no gum in the house rule. My daughter says she always uses her gum responsibly, so it's still her right to chew. Should I let my daughter keep her gum?
Yeah, Allie from Alabama. Sorry if I have a hard time believing that that's a real person.
Allie, let me use an analogy to help with this one. Imagine for a moment that I am surrounded by people who play with their gun. With these people spitting bullets all over, would my mother still let me keep my gun?
Because comparing the government to a mom disciplining their children isn't even slightly terrifying. It's a flawed analogy on top of that. Children are dependents and their parents own the house privately, while governments are parasitic monopolies on arbitration which don't own any property and have no proof of their legitimacy or justifications for their made-up laws, and the people who they force themselves onto are independent and perfectly capable of looking out for themselves and solving their own problems. I mean, I'm sorry, but am I the only one a little bit bugged out that the gun grabbers are openly promoting a nanny state?
Here to answer that question is my favorite mother from live musicals on TV, Anna Gasteyer.
Thank you for having me, Jordan. Sit up straight. You look like Shigeru Quasimodo.
If I were using my gun the right way, but others weren't, would you still let me keep mine?
Of course not.
Because I guess the right to self-ownership allowing us free association doesn't exist, and I guess the Constitution isn't a thing. Nope, we're just gonna start treating people who've done nothing wrong as criminals because people who are criminals utilized something that everyone has the right to obtain to commit crimes and victimize people. Alright, here are two things that gun control advocates need to realize that it's pretty clear they don't right now. Firstly, when you ban guns, you are not getting rid of them. What's happening is the government is monopolizing the ownership of guns in their own hands and stopping private citizens from obtaining them. So if you have a problem with police brutality or just generally how they conduct themselves now, imagine what the police will be like if you make it so they're the only people legally allowed to own guns. And don't forget who the president is right now. So just keep that in mind, that banning guns, quote-unquote, isn't actually going to make them disappear. It's just going to give Cheeto Benito a monopoly on them. And secondly is what I've mentioned earlier. By coercing people out of their rights who've done absolutely nothing wrong, what you are doing is telling them that their rights depend on other people's actions and not their own. Imagine if, say, for example, another Ted Bundy came along and murdered like 20 people. Then the government decided to arrest everyone in the entire country for murder. Would you say that's fucked up? Hell yes! That's tyranny to the most severe extent, and in principle, a gun ban is no different.
But I didn't do anything wrong.
It's a fair point you make. This was not your mistake. I'm a law-abiding son. Why take away my gun? But as a mother in charge of your fun.
So people don't have rights, people don't have free will. The government, which is an entity that can't survive unless there are people associating privately with their own free will to steal property from, and has no justification or explanation for its existence, has the right to tell us what to do, how to act, what we can and can't own, and how we can and can't associate. Fuck that.
The acts of another can ruin it for everyone.
Oh my god. So you're not only acknowledging that gun control is treating people who've done nothing wrong as criminals, but what you're saying is that it's a good thing for that to be our standard of justice? These people have no right to complain about any tyranny if this is going to be their standard of justice. No, they literally don't, because there's not a single thing you can't justify with this mentality. The government can do nothing wrong, and it can do anything it wants to anyone at any time for any reason. I mean, name historical atrocities. Slavery, the Holocaust, the Great Leap Forward, Khmer Rouge, North Korea, deliberate famines caused by the Soviet Union. Explain to me, using your standard of justice, how you can argue that any of these things are wrong.
That's because, as you always say...
This is why we can't have nice assault weapons or you know what, guns of any kind. When it comes to our kids, it's time for us to step in instead of think and pray for peace of mind.
Of course! You can't even begin to try and justify what you're proposing. You're just gonna go straight to browbeating anyone who disagrees with you with emotional pleas and the cliche, "Oh, won't someone think of the children?" argument, because you're a sycophantic derelict who can only think with your emotions due to your IQ being lower than your reason comprehension skills.
Government says sacrifices sometimes should be made in the name of the greater good.
There's that ambiguous term again, the greater good, you know, the one that's used by people who can't argue for their position and has essentially been used to try and justify every tyranny in recorded history. There is no such thing as a greater good, because as already noted, there's nothing that the government can do which isn't tyrannical or terribly inefficient and would be better off left to private individuals associating voluntarily. Governments require tyranny fundamentally in order to sustain themselves, because they have no means to produce something which somebody would want. And even when the things they are doing aren't blatant violations of our rights, like any form of prohibition, for example, governments are making it more expensive to produce commodities for trade, making it harder to get a job by making it more expensive to employ workers, and establishing monopolies by forcing competition out of the market or artificially making it more difficult for competition to emerge. So no, nothing the government does can arguably be considered a good, and anything which actually is good can be done voluntarily between individuals on mutually agreed upon terms. So, when someone uses the term, the greater good, I tend to picture a pyramid of skulls created by the Khmer Rouge, because that is the logical conclusion of the greater good.
Someone tainted Tylenol, they fixed the flaw. There was one shoe bomb, and they changed the law.
Private companies started making their packages tamper-resistant to satisfy consumer demand, which required no government intervention at all, because private companies need profit, and they know that they won't get any if their customers think there's a chance that they could die if they use their products. And while it was the TSA who stepped in to make these Orwellian rules, terrorists could easily be stopped with some simple private security. All the TSA's done in reality is made flying less efficient.
And when guns kill kids, that's the final.
Second Amendment.
That's exactly what they always do. They shoot us down by invoking the Second Amendment.
Oh, damn you and your pesky rights. Why don't you people want to just bend over and lick the dog shit off my jackboots?
Honest to God, I couldn't make you sound as bad as you made yourself sound. Congratulations, that is fucking impressive.
Don't they understand how much there is to lose? There are lives at stake, and don't forget whose.
It didn't work the first time. Maybe if I try it again, people will become emotional shitlibs and agree with me.
Nothing's more important than the safety of a child.
Well, considering that there is an observable correlation between an increase in gun ownership and a drop in violent crime, such as in 1991 to 2015, where in the United States a total of 170 million guns were legally purchased and the violent crime rate dropped 51%. Or how in Kennesaw, Georgia, there's a city mandate since 1984 which states that all citizens are legally required to have a gun, and since that law was passed, there have been a total of 92 violent crimes to date, and out of which no one has been murdered. Or how the low estimate of crimes stopped annually with guns nationwide is 50,000, while gun deaths, not crimes, but deaths overall caused by guns only amounts to about 30,000 annually. Or how, according to the Brady score, states and cities with higher regulations on gun ownership and gun use have higher violent crime. I'd say that having more guns makes kids safer by far, but what say you?
So time to take your guns and the rhetoric you stockpile.
Oh, fuck off! You are not the side with the facts. You don't even have a coherent argument, for fuck's sake. You are seriously going to tell us to stop using rhetoric when this entire fucking video, the closest thing you've made to an argument was, think of the children.
Only in a society where the media is a subsidized pawn of the government can someone like yourself be taken even remotely seriously.
Whoa, that's pretty radical. Most of us are against assault weapons, but even we liberals can't go after the Second Amendment itself.
Yeah, except the thing is that the term assault weapon doesn't actually exist. It's a rhetorical term created by gun-grabbing politicians to scare people into supporting whatever bills they proposed.
Why not?
I mean, we just don't. It's always, look, we're not saying we're coming for your guns.
Actually, now we are.
Well, I'm glad that you don't even pretend to care about gun rights anymore because no one bought it to begin with. I mean, everyone knows freedom of speech entails that you can say anything that you want because you're a human being. Imagine if someone came along and said, well, the government should be allowed to control what people can and can't say, but I still support freedom of speech. They'd be mocked relentlessly all over the media. But that same argument was being used seriously when it came to gun ownership. And not only that, but they honestly wanted people to believe that they weren't infringing upon their liberties with this argument. But that's not the only thing I love about this. The host also implies that there was never a base for them supporting gun rights, claiming that they only supported it just for optics. So now, not only are they admitting that they don't believe in gun rights, but when they try and backpedal in the future, which they inevitably will once they see how this negatively affects their political influence, they won't be able to because they've already admitted that they never believed in gun rights and only pretended to do so. They didn't scare away any political opportunities. Boom! You just checkmated yourselves, bitches.
Wait, really?
This is why we can't have compromise. I understand you think that hunting's neat, but sometimes our pastimes jeopardize our lives, which matter more than your precious skeet.
Even though, as noted, higher amounts of gun ownership leads to a lower crime rate, but I suppose you've already demonstrated that facts don't matter as long as you can exploit children as political pawns. So go on. Also, hunting is not the only use for guns. Of course, they can be owned for self-defense, they can be collected. Just get creative. There are plenty of ways to use a gun outside of hunting and murder. Oh, wait. You believe in the greater good, so I probably shouldn't ask you to think outside the box.
I understand you really had a ball. Then one lone wolf went and ruined it all. And by one, I mean 96 deaths a day.
Around 50 of which are suicides and 20 are in self-defense.
So even though there are a lot of people who use guns responsibly, the fun we get to have with them isn't worth the destruction they cause.
Exactly. You know, there's a lot of things we do that with.
Like lawn darts,
Uh-huh.
Sudafed, and adopted animals are harder to get than a gun because of the actions of a few.
And as if you hadn't already demonstrated your lack of knowledge on guns, you go a step further by claiming that there's no regulation on guns, which is just demonstrably false. Also, Sudafed protectionism is a result of government monopolization and only has made getting Sudafed less efficient. Pet adoption is not really regulated, they just give you forms listing the medical history of the pet that you take. As for AKC rules and ASPCA rules, both of those are private organizations. And lawn darts, well, those were banned, but you don't need to ban lawn darts, and you shouldn't because some people used them irresponsibly. Punish the criminals, not the innocent people.
Exactly.
But what about safety? And guns for protection?
Allow me to issue a logic correction. A gun beneath your pillow makes you feel secure. Till you think your granny's a burglar, then it loses its allure.
Yeah, I'd say that's her fault. I mean, have you ever heard of knocking? Or, better yet, have you heard of approaching the house? Well, back around 100 years ago or so, for this exact reason, people before walking up to someone's house would yell, "approaching the house," to avoid being mistaken for a burglar. Ever heard of something called neuroplasticity? Well, in short, conventional behavior in society is influenced by the surrounding environment, and if you live in a society where everyone is assumed to have a gun and it's readily available, people become more responsible for securing their own existence.
They say a good guy with a gun could stop a bad guy with a gun.
But neither has to die if neither one has one.
Oh my god, you morons actually think that a gun ban will stop criminals from getting guns. In short, you're wrong. Demonstrably wrong. Look at any time that prohibition of any commodity has ever been tried at any time in history. The exact opposite always ends up happening. Instead, the only people who readily use guns are violent criminals. And this also ends up strengthening mafias and cartels because this creates a giant black market, and mafias and cartels form because of the demand for protection, which normally black market dealers would receive from police but can't since their product is outlawed and they would be thrown in jail if they tried.
I only wonder how these men will find their sense of self-worth and masculinity without their pew-pew.
Who you are as a man isn't found in your gun, and who we are as a country should be safe for everyone. Australians stayed butch after their overhaul.
So if you're a macho prick, you can stay one after all. Take us home!
This is why we can't have Rambo teachers.
This is why we can't have dummy leaders. This is why we can't have not nice things.
Well, I didn't necessarily expect you to be above ad hominem, so...
And when the government needs to be overthrown, get your ass out and vote, 'cause we can't do this alone.
So basically, your answer to oppression is, well, if we just get on our knees and beg our masters, they'll let us keep our rights. Yeah, no, sorry. We need to be able to defend ourselves from tyranny, especially in the form of an unaccountable monopoly on violence, which needs to oppress our rights in order to exist. Also, game theory has scientifically demonstrated that each vote is statistically irrelevant, about a 1 in 60 million chance of influencing anything. But even then, you illustrated exactly the problem with democracy or republicanism. It doesn't ensure your rights, it enables tyranny by way of voting or majority opinion. You yourselves are a bunch of tyrants who encourage people to vote to get your way. If anything, you're proving how bad democracy actually is. In conclusion, this video was not only bad, it was scary. There is an actual political movement in the United States now which has no regard for human rights, openly advocates for punishing innocent people for crimes that they didn't commit, and believes in the consequentialist notion of a greater good. Let's hope that the state is abolished before these people can get anywhere near political power.